My husband wasn't just a man. He was a force of nature, a storm disguised in charm and brilliance. When he walked into a room, silence followed as if everyone instinctively knew that their attention belonged to him. I was no different. For years, I devoted myself to him, building a life, a home, a sanctuary where I thought love would be enough to heal the cracks in his soul. I poured myself into those fractures like liquid gold, convinced my devotion could fill the emptiness that echoed inside him. But love cannot cure emptiness. It only feeds it until there's nothing left of the giver. The early years seemed like a dream. He would look at me with those eyes that seemed to see right through me, making me feel chosen, special. I believed every word, every promise, but slowly a shift began. His charisma turned sharper, his charm became a weapon, and I found myself shrinking under the weight of his certainty. Every time he contradicted me, I doubted my memory. Every time he dismissed my feelings, I wondered if I was too sensitive. I began walking on eggshells in my own home, careful not to trigger his storms, and still they came. I became a ghost in my own life. Friends drifted away because I could never explain the chaos without sounding insane. Family stopped asking questions because every answer I gave was rehearsed, protecting his image. I laughed at the right times, smiled at the right moments, but inside I was unraveling. Nights became long stretches of silent terror, where I replayed his words in my head, searching for the truth in the lies. My heart raced over nothing. My stomach knotted at the sound of his footsteps. I didn't realize it then, but I was living in a constant state of survival. Deep inside me, another self was being born. While the wife sobbed quietly into her pillow, another part of me, the analyst, was taking notes. Cold, detached, meticulous. I didn't even realize it was happening at first, but slowly I became a recorder of his contradictions. I remembered every subtle jab, every manufactured crisis he created whenever I felt joy. My mind was a war zone, but in the back of that battlefield, the analyst built her bunker and waited. The breaking point wasn't a betrayal of epic proportions. It wasn't some scandalous affair or brutal fight. It was a small, stupid lie. He told it with a smirk that dripped with contempt, as if daring me to question him. That smirk was the final piece of data the analyst needed. In that instant, something inside me shifted. 14 years of love, hope, and pain collapsed into a single point of cold clarity. The grief for the man I thought I married lasted only seconds. Then it was gone. The wife was dead. The operator had taken over. And my new mission was simple: plan the extraction. From that day forward, I stopped seeing him as my husband. Emotion was a liability, and I couldn't afford liabilities. He became Project H. I treated him like a hostile state actor, profiling him not as a man, but as a system. His directives were clear: acquire control, acquire stimulation. His strengths: manipulation, charm, intelligence. His weaknesses: a fragile ego dependent on my validation, predictable cycles driven by boredom, and a deep, unhealed wound with his father. I didn't love him anymore. I studied him. Every look, every word, every action became data in a case file. To fight him on his terms, emotional manipulation, lies, endless psychological warfare, would be suicide. So I built a new game, open source warfare. I dragged everything he thrived on: secrecy, shadows, into the blinding light. I started posting on forums, describing his patterns, sometimes on Reddit, sometimes elsewhere. And when he discovered it, I didn't hide it. I showed him. He thought it was obsession, a desperate cry for help. His arrogance blinded him to the truth. I wasn't trying to fix our marriage. I was crowdsourcing his instruction manual. and I was going to dismantle him with it. Then I built platforms, websites, a nonprofit, even a social enterprise inspired by our journey. And I invited him to help. He didn't realize he was collaborating on the very monument to his own defeat. He couldn't call it a revenge blog. It was a legitimate organization. He was even on the payroll. I watched with quiet satisfaction as he poured his energy into projects designed to free me from him. The preparation took years. But when the time came, I knew I had my script, my plan, my data. This wouldn't be a breakup. This was an operation. In the final 24 hours, I became execution itself. I presented him with undeniable proof of his lies. Cold, precise, dated, driven, he tried to laugh it off, intimidate me, twist the narrative as always. But this time I didn't argue. For every attempt at manipulation, I doubled the financial demand. 200,000 became 300,000. Each increase was a shock to his system, reprogramming him in real time. And when I hit his vulnerability, I didn't flinch. I made him call his father to secure the money. The humiliation shattered him. Before I walked out for the last time, I paused. I looked into the eyes of the man who had consumed so much of my life, and I smiled. Then I whispered, outwit, outlast, outplay. I left with the money, but more importantly, with my freedom. That was just the beginning. The scream inside me turned into a war cry, and with each passing day I rebuilt myself from the ashes. And if you're still listening to this story, take a second. Subscribe to *The Scream of Revenge *, because the journey doesn't end here. Freedom was supposed to taste like fresh air, but at first it tasted like fear. The night I left, with $300,000 secured and my last words echoing in the silence, outwit, outlast, outplay, I thought I'd won. But victory is never that simple. My hands shook for days, my chest ached as if my ribs were still in a cage. I kept expecting the phone to ring with his voice on the other end, smooth and venomous, pulling me back into his labyrinth. Every knock on the door felt like an ambush. I rented a tiny apartment in a neighborhood where no one knew me. The paint on the walls peeled, the plumbing rattled, but none of that mattered. It was mine. Mine, and free of him. Yet silence terrified me. Every creak in the hallway, every echo of footsteps sent my nerves screaming. I'd jolt awake at night, drenched in sweat, convinced he was standing at the foot of my bed with that smirk he always wore when he thought he had won. Freedom didn't feel like freedom. It felt like an unfamiliar battlefield. Then came his first message. 3 weeks after I disappeared, "You can't live without me." Just 5 words. I stared at the screen until my eyes blurred. Then came the calls, blocked numbers, late nights, heavy silence on the other end. Then flowers, delivered with neat cards in the same handwriting that once wrote love notes, now twisted into barbed reminders. He was letting me know I could leave the house, but not the war. But trauma sharpens you. I didn't crumble. I documented. Every call, every letter, every appearance in places he shouldn't be. I logged it all. My life had become a case file, and I was the investigator. I stopped asking, "Why is he doing this?" and started asking, "What can I do with the evidence?" Each screenshot, each timestamp, was another weapon in my arsenal. The nonprofit I built became my shield. Survivors found me, voices trembling at first, then gaining strength as they shared their stories. Different names, different faces, but always the same patterns. Each time someone confided in me, I recognized the same cage I had lived in. We weren't alone anymore. Together, we were building something stronger than secrecy. We were building a network of truth. And truth is sunlight. Men like him burn under it. He hated every word I spoke in interviews, every stage I stood on, every article published with my name beside it. I could feel his fury in the messages he sent, less seductive now, more vicious. But what he never understood was that transparency was my armor. He couldn't smear me because I had nothing to hide. Every financial record was public, every decision documented. He was shadow boxing against a wall of glass. Still, victory came at a cost. Nights stretched long. Sometimes I'd look in the mirror and barely recognize the woman staring back. My eyes, once soft, carried a hardness I didn't like to admit. I missed the version of myself that believed love could heal anyone. But then I remembered that softness was the very rope he had wrapped around my neck. I couldn't mourn it. Survival had a price, and I had already paid with years of silence. 2 years passed before the next storm. A mutual friend called me late one night, her voice hesitant. She'd been at a party where he bragged, loud and shameless, that he was going to tear down everything I'd built. His arrogance hadn't faded. It had evolved. He wasn't just coming for me. He was coming for my work, my community, the people who trusted me, and that was a line he should never have crossed. I fortified everything, every contract in the non-prof. It was airtight. Every account tracked, lawyers prepped, allies informed. By the time his first attack came, a false accusation designed to trigger an investigation, I didn't panic. I simply pulled out a file I'd prepared months earlier. Evidence, timelines, witnesses. Within hours his claim collapsed, but he didn't stop. He never stops. Lawsuits, rumors, fake social media campaigns. He launched them all, and each one fell apart before it gained traction. To him, it was incomprehensible. How could his lies, his games, his manipulation not work? He thought life was smoke and mirrors. He couldn't understand that my strength came from stripping away the smoke, from putting everything in the open where his shadows had no power. He was still playing with secrets, but I had bankrupted him of that currency. But don't think I lived without fear. There were nights when shadows crept too close. I'd wake in terror, hearing echoes of his voice. I'd sit in the dark, shaking, telling myself over and over, "He can't touch you now." Yet the fear was real. It always will be. That's what trauma does. It doesn't vanish. It waits. It lingers. But I didn't let it rule me. Fear became fuel, and every time I stood in front of a room filled with survivors, faces scarred by pain but eyes lit with something stronger, I realized this wasn't just about him anymore. It was about all of us. Every story told on stage was another chain broken, another scream turned into strength. That's when I understood. I wasn't rebuilding just my life. I was helping build an army. Still, the operator in me never slept. I watched, I tracked, I stayed ready, because men like him don't quit. They mutate, and one night, staring at my reflection, I whispered to myself, "The wife is gone, the operator remains," and I meant it. If you've followed me this far, then you know this isn't just a story of revenge. It's survival weaponized, and if you want more, if you want to see what comes next, then subscribe to the Scream of Revenge. Because, trust me, the war isn't over, not for me, not for anyone still trapped in the game. The silence after his last defeat was deceptive. I knew men like him didn't simply vanish. They retreated, they recalculated, and they returned sharper, meaner, more dangerous. My operator instincts never allowed me to trust peace. Every quiet day felt like the ticking calm before a storm. And when the storm finally arrived, it wasn't thunder, it was fire. It began with whispers. Anonymous emails sent to journalists with fabricated stories about me, about my nonprofit, about how I was supposedly the manipulator, the fraud, the abuser. The words were sharp, designed to cut not just at my reputation, but at my credibility. At first, I laughed, because the lies were laughable, but laughter doesn't stop poison from spreading. Within weeks, I noticed the shift. Colleagues grew colder, donors asked questions with raised brows, volunteers avoided eye contact. His lies had seeped into the cracks of perception. That's when the real war began, not the war for money, not even the war for freedom. This was the war for truth, and truth, I had learned, is the deadliest weapon of all. I didn't lash out. I didn't scream. Instead, I built a fortress of evidence. Every receipt, every testimony, every recording, every document. I compiled them like ammunition. If he wanted to drag me into the shadows again, I would drag him into the blinding light. And when the first journalist published his smear, I unleashed it. A tidal wave of data, undeniable, irrefutable, devastating. Within hours, the story collapsed. Within days, the journalist printed a retraction with a rare public apology. And within weeks, his credibility, not mine, was in shreds. But men like him don't stop when their knives dull. They find new blades. His next attack was personal, intimate, invasive. He hacked into my private accounts, or at least he tried to. Password resets, strange logins from faraway places, files suddenly corrupted. At first, I panicked. My hands shook when I saw my phone light up with another suspicious activity, alert. But then I remembered who I was now. I wasn't the crying wife anymore. I was the operator. Fear was fuel, and paranoia was survival. I brought in experts, cybersecurity specialists, forensic analysts, white, hat hackers who knew the darkness he was crawling through. Within days, the tables turned. Not only did we block his intrusions, we traced them. Every attempt, every IP, every backdoor he tried to open was documented, logged, and tied to him. And then, when I had enough, I didn't call him. I didn't warn him. I simply filed it all neatly, quietly, with law enforcement. Weeks later, he was called in for questioning. The smirk, I'm told, slipped for the first time. That smirk, the one that used to make me doubt myself, the one that haunted my nights, was finally cracking. But the most dangerous battles are the ones you don't see. He knew he couldn't outwit me with lies anymore. He knew he couldn't outplay me with manipulation. So he tried the one weapon left in his arsenal, pity. He called mutual friends, crying, begging, spinning stories about how he was the real victim. He showed up at family events, hollow-eyed, weaving narratives about how I had destroyed him, taken everything, ruined his life. And I'll admit, there was a moment, a single dangerous moment, when I felt it. That tug, that ache in my chest that remembered the man I once thought I loved. But then I remembered the analyst, the operator. The wife was dead. Sympathy was no longer a chain around my neck. I cut the cord before it could strangle me again. The screams of revenge are not always loud. Sometimes they are silent victories, seen only in the hollow look of a man who has lost control of his favorite puppet. And if you're listening to this, don't forget, subscribe to the Scream of Revenge, because the story wasn't over yet. The real climax came not with a bang, but with a trial. He had overstepped. Too many lies, too many intrusions, too much arrogance. My case was airtight, and when the court date arrived, I walked in not as a victim, not even as a survivor, but as the architect of his undoing. He sat across from me, eyes burning, jaw tight, his arrogance now a brittle mask barely holding back the fear beneath. For once, he was the one on the defensive. For once, he was the one whose every word was measured. monitored, dissected. I didn't gloat. I didn't scream. I didn't even smile. I simply let the evidence speak. Every contradiction, every manipulation, every falsehood unraveled before the judge like a rotten thread pulled from a once proud garment, and when the gavel finally struck, declaring him guilty, not of love lost, not of broken promises, but of crimes with consequences, his mask shattered, he looked at me, and for the first time in 14 years there was no smirk, no contempt, no superiority. There was only defeat. Walking out of that courtroom, the air felt different, lighter, sharper. Real. For years I had been suffocating under the weight of his presence, his manipulation, his darkness, and now, finally, I could breathe, truly breathe. But don't mistake this for a happy ending. There are no fairy tales when you escape monsters. There are scars deep and permanent. There are nights when the shadows creep too close, when the echoes of his voice still find their way into my dreams. There are days when I wonder if the cold, calculating part of me will ever rest. The operator doesn't sleep, not fully. And maybe that's the price of survival, to kill the kindest parts of yourself so that the rest can live. To bury the softness that once believed in redemption, in second chances, in love's power to heal. I don't have those illusions anymore. What I have is clarity, and clarity is freedom. This is not just my story. It's the story of every person who has ever walked on eggshells, doubted their own memory, silenced their own screams. It's the story of what happens when the powerless discover the one truth their abusers can never handle, that secrets are cages and truth is the key. So if you've made it this far, know this: the war I fought is not mine alone. It's yours too. It's every survivor's, and together we are rewriting the game. Outwit, outlast, outplay, and one last thing, because you don't want to miss what comes next. Subscribe to the scream of revenge. Freedom after the trial wasn't the fairy tale ending people imagine. Yes, he was convicted. Yes, his empire of lies had been torn down. But monsters don't die when a judge bangs a gavel. They linger, like smoke in your lungs, like shadows that refuse to vanish even when the lights are on. At first, I told myself it was over. I moved into a small house outside the city, surrounded by trees, where the air smelled like pine and the nights were quiet except for the hum of cicadas. It should have felt like peace. It should have felt like victory, but my body didn't believe it. My hands still twitched when I heard a door slam. My heart still raced whenever an unknown number called. I kept a baseball bat by my bed, and sometimes I woke up clutching it without remembering how it got there. That's the thing about surviving someone like him. You win the battle, but the war lives on inside you, and then came the letters, not from him. He wasn't allowed to contact me anymore, but from strangers. Survivors who had seen my story, read about my nonprofit, or heard me speak on podcasts. Some wrote with shaky handwriting on crumpled paper. Others emailed late at night, paragraphs pouring out like floodwaters. They all said the same thing: your story is mine. You gave me the courage to leave. At first, I cried every time I read one. Then I started answering. Then I started meeting some of them, sitting across from women whose haunted eyes mirrored my own from years before. Slowly, I realized my fight wasn't just about escaping him. It was about helping others escape too. But with each new story I heard, I noticed something chilling. He wasn't unique. There were hundreds like him. Thousands, men, and sometimes women, who wore masks of charm, who thrived on manipulation, who hollowed out the people they claimed to love. It was like I'd been pulled into an underworld where predators moved in plain sight, unseen because society didn't want to look too closely. And that's when the operator in me stirred again. Survival wasn't enough. Defense wasn't enough. If monsters were going to keep breeding in the shadows, then someone needed to drag them, kicking and screaming, into the light. So I built something bigger than my nonprofit, a coalition, a network that trained survivors not just to heal, but to fight back. Lawyers, therapists, cybersecurity experts, even private investigators. We brought them together under one banner. And every time a survivor walked through our doors, we didn't just give them comfort. We gave them weapons, truth, documentation, strategy, because sometimes healing isn't quiet. Sometimes healing is war. Of course, he couldn't stand it. From behind bars, he found ways to send messages. Through friends, through coded letters, through whispers that somehow found their way back to me. They all carried the same venom. You think you've won, but I'll never stop. And part of me believed him. I'd seen his obsession. I knew how much he thrived on the game, but instead of breaking me, his words only fueled me. He had accidentally written my mission statement. If he would never stop, then neither would I. The scariest night came 3 years later. I was locking up the center after a late meeting when I heard footsteps behind me. Slow, measured, deliberate. My body froze, every nerve screaming. For a second, I was back in that marriage. Eggshell floors, shadows on the wall, a voice dripping with contempt. I turned, heart hammering, ready to fight. It wasn't him. It was one of his old associates, a man he used to brag about playing poker with, the kind of parasite who orbited him for scraps of attention. He leaned against the streetlight, smiling in that same oily way predators always do. He says, "Hello." The man whispered. My hands shook, not with fear, but with rage. This was his message, that even locked away, he could still reach me, that I would never truly be free. But he made a mistake. He underestimated who I had become. I didn't run. I didn't cry. I looked the man in the eye and said, "Tell him this. The wife is gone. The operator remains. And if he wants another war, I'm ready." The man's smirk faltered. He expected fear. Instead, he got fire. He walked away, and I never saw him again. That night, as I sat in my car, shaking from the adrenaline, I whispered into the silence, outwit, outlast, outplay. And then louder, stronger, to anyone who would listen. Subscribe to the scream of revenge. Because this wasn't just a personal battle anymore. This was a movement, a rebellion against every manipulator, every liar, every shadow that thought it could thrive in silence. People often ask me if I regret what I had to become, if I regret killing the softer parts of myself just to survive, and maybe the old me, the wife, would have said yes. She would have wept for what was lost. But I don't, because the truth is, monsters don't respect kindness. They exploit it. Monsters don't stop when you beg. They stop when you fight, and I fought. I won, and I'll keep winning. Not just for me, but for every voice still trapped in the dark, waiting for their chance to scream. This isn't the end of my story. It never will be, because every new survivor I meet, every new battle I fight, every new shadow I drag into the light, it's all part of the same war, and I'll never stop. So if you're still listening, still here with me at this point, you already know what I'm going to say. Don't just listen. Don't just watch. Stand with me. Fight with me, and above all, subscribe to the scream of revenge. The world believed the story ended in that courtroom. The papers wrote their headlines. The nonprofit celebrated its victory. Strangers congratulated me on being finally free. But freedom, I learned, isn't a single event. It's a war fought daily against the shadows that cling to your skin. And even after he was caged, his shadow tried to follow me. Years passed, and I rebuilt myself piece by piece. My network grew beyond anything I could have imagined. Survivors became leaders, leaders became warriors, and warriors became a movement. What started as my escape had become something unstoppable, bigger than me, bigger than him. Yet at night, when the world grew quiet, I sometimes still heard him. His laugh echoing down hallways, his whisper brushing the back of my neck. My body would tense, as if preparing for an ambush that never came. Trauma doesn't vanish, it lurks, but so does resilience. The last time his presence touched my life came in a way I didn't expect. He had filed appeal after appeal, desperate to claw back some sense of control. Each one failed, but during his final attempt, something strange happened. Instead of another smear campaign, another venomous outburst, he sent me a letter, not through the courts, not through lawyers, a direct message, handwritten, shaky. I stared at the envelope for hours before opening it. My hands trembled, not with fear but with the gravity of what it represented. Inside was a single sheet of paper. His words were simple. You killed me without pulling a trigger. I see you everywhere. You win. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I didn't even smile. I just folded the letter and placed it in a box filled with every other reminder of the war I had fought. Police reports, transcripts, screenshots, recordings. That box wasn't a coffin for my past. It was a trophy case, proof that monsters can be defeated when you stop playing by their rules. And for the first time in over a decade, I felt it. Not just survival, not just defense, but peace. Real, quiet, sacred peace. From that day forward, my mission changed. I wasn't just fighting him anymore. I wasn't just surviving. I was building something that outlived both of us. The coalition expanded across states, then across countries. Survivors carried our message into courts, schools, governments. We trained people to spot the warning signs, to cut the strings of manipulation before they tightened into nooses. My personal war had become a global rebellion. And still, in the quiet moments, I remind myself of the truth. I didn't win because I was stronger. I didn't win because I was smarter. I won because I became willing to be what he never expected. A woman who stopped begging for mercy and started building her own battlefield. Sometimes when I speak on stage, I see young women in the front row, their eyes wide, their hands gripping notebooks, hanging on every word. They're waiting for permission, permission to fight back, permission to stop loving the person who's destroying them, permission to scream, and I give it to them, not with speeches, not with pretty words, but with proof. Proof that you can survive, proof that you can fight, proof that you can win. The last time I told my story publicly, I ended with this. Monsters don't live under your bed. They live beside you, they laugh with you, they charm you, and they thrive on your silence. But once you strip them of that silence, once you drag them into the light, they wither. They always wither. The room was silent when I finished. Then the applause came, not polite, not gentle, but thunderous, rising like a wave, crashing against every wall, shaking the ground beneath my feet. In that moment, I understood. My revenge wasn't about him anymore. It was about rewriting the rules for every survivor who came after me. So here I am, telling you the end of one war and the beginning of another. My life is no longer defined by what he took from me. It's defined by what I built out of the ashes, and if you've stayed with me through this journey, through every scar and scream and victory, then you're part of it too. This isn't just my confession, it's my legacy. And it's your call to action, because somewhere out there, another monster is charming their way into someone's life. Another survivor is walking on eggshells, doubting their own memory, silencing their own voice. And they need to hear this. They need to know they aren't crazy, they aren't weak, and they aren't alone. So don't let this story end here. Carry it forward, share it, live it, fight with it, and most of all subscribe to the scream of revenge. Outwit, outlast, outplay, survive, and never ever be silent again.